I'm Dave.
I'm Wallace, and this is Ska. And this week's episode, I have a special guest, a friend of ours.
Very special.
Special is it? Yes. He is leaving the state of Los Angeles and running away to glorious, dreary, rainy Portland. He's done with us here in LA. Everyone say hello to Andrew.
Andrew Lyons, climate refugee.
Andrew is one of our dear friends from here in LA. He came to us from the East Coast.
Well, dear is a stretch.
Yes, well, very true.
He's a guy we know.
We picked him up off the street, really.
It's not like I loan him money, but he's a guy that I know.
He's an acquaintance, kind of annoying, but...
Yeah.
But he does like the Pietasters, so
yes, that's very true.
That speaks volumes.
On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the Pietasters' album Ooolooloo.
Oolooloo.
Sorry, cut that out.
You don't even know what
No,
album
keep that in. I'm glad you called it Ooolooloo.
Everyone calls it Ooolooloo. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your fascination, Andrew, with the Pietasters and why that is and how it came to be?
Well, it really is a story of happenstance, because I grew up
I've been a happenstance.
You're thinking of Hoppin' John's. I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, outside of D.C., and had never heard of Pietasters until I moved down to Charleston, South Carolina in 1996. I was working at a grocery store, and one of my cashiers came up to me, and he's like, "Do you like ska?" And I was like, "You mean like Madness?" And he goes, "No, ska." And I was like, "Man, I feel old." I was like, "Yes, I do like ska." And he said, "Man, there's this band playing next week called Johnny Sacco, and you should go. You'll love it." And so I went, and I loved it. In the 90s, I wasn't listening to ska at the time, and that 98 was kind of my reintroduction to ska music. I was trying to discover current ska bands at the late 90s. And someone said, "Man, you should check out this band called the Pietasters. They're really, really good." And so I did, and yeah, they were really, really good. And I think Awesome Mixtape number 6 came out around that time, probably 1999. They just so happened about 2 years later came to play in Charleston, South Carolina at the Music Farm, and that was it. I've been a fan ever since.
And that's how it went.
Yeah, which was really, it was strange because they're from, Arlington, Virginia, that area. So, they were literally an hour away my entire life and had never heard of them.
Which is ironic because thousands of miles away, Denver was one of the places that all the Moon record bands stopped on their way west. And so I've been listening to them for years.
It's interesting how that can happen, though, when you have a local band you should know about, but they're always on tour and you just keep missing them or you're not really into that scene. And
what happened with the Pietasters is they got their start in Blacksburg, Virginia in 1989, and they were really just playing like local shows in the mid-Atlantic states. And then when they got picked up by Moon Ska and opened for the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, that really expanded their range. In that 1996 period that they began touring the country outside of just the mid-Atlantic states.
That was the sweet spot for a third wave.
In the mid-Atlantic area, it was kind of underground. In the late 90s, you had ska scenes in Boston, New York City, Los Angeles. The platform, I guess you could say, for national touring bands was already established by 1995.
Dave, when did you first hear of the Pietasters? What was your first experience with the Pietasters?
A buddy of mine named Rude Boy Joaquin made a mixtape for me, and it had sections of different bands that came through Denver a bunch. And so, like the Skeletones with the Pussy Song and Pietasters and the Scofflaws. But there was a big batch of Pietasters off of Oolooloo, so I wore that tape out. Those songs are so strong. Then we got to see them a bunch in Denver because they like coming there. So that was the goods. And those guys take off their clothes like nobody's business.
Is a running theme for the band is that they have no problem removing clothes in their performances?
I interviewed them. The first time that I ever interviewed them, Mr. Jackson decided that he was going to...
Mr. Jackson, lead singer.
Decided he was going to show me his impersonation of Girl Man. And this was like, I don't know, the third or fourth band that I'd ever interviewed. And he's like, "Hey, you want to see an impersonation of Girl Man?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, sure." So he goes out, tucks his package in behind him, and does the Silence of the Lambs, full frontal, "Look, I'm a girl with no penis."
Beautiful imagery there, by the way. Thank you. As our listeners can imagine seeing that, was very graphic. Thank you.
I mean, it was funny and a little scary and kind of funny.
Would you say that the probability that this was alcohol-induced
No, dude, it was before the show. Like
that doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, no, that's with those guys. They're just like
no. This is just that. That's yeah. Regardless of the amount of alcohol consumed, it was make it as much as possible.
They may have been loaded, but I don't think they were. I think they just thought it'd be funny, and so they did it.
Yeah.
Another show, they had an additional chorus where they would say, "Take your pants off," and the guy playing guitar would drop his drawers, and then put your pants back on. And just like up and down through the entire song. They did an example of the whole band demonstrating how you need to take a pee at a rest stop. And so they all dropped trowel, so everybody's ass is standing out there. All of them, it was pants to the ground. I mean, just they are out of control, or were, and probably still are.
Right, because that's 20 years ago, 95, around there.
Yeah.
98. It's been 20 years since, because that was when you were living in Denver.
Yeah, that was.
And you were doing all the interviewing. Is there any other specific performance or the first time you saw
So
them?
that isn't enough. Like, them,
I'm just saying, you got some great stories here. So.
Well, I mean, the thing about it is, they were the only band that was like, "Hey, you want some burgers? Because the local promoter is paying for it." And they certainly understood, how that relationship worked.
Taking full advantage.
You need to take advantage of it while you got it.
Yes.
And so they gave me a
As a
hamburger.
touring band, if you get fed, make sure you...
They were also opening for the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones a little later, and I had slacked and not gotten myself on the list, and so I showed up at the show, and they laughed at me for trying to get in, because it was totally sold out. And then the trombonist is like, "Hey, didn't we take our clothes off for you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, come in."
The least that we could do for showing you our penises is get you into the show for free, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they're awesome.
Did you tuck your junk? And then they're like, "She's with us."
Yeah.
They're like, "Ladies free tonight."
Come on in. Andrew, what about you? You've always been known, for a lot of us as sort of the Pietasters guy, the representative, a huge fan of them. And you spoke a little bit about how you became with them. What about you? What about any crazy stories? What about any, the first time you saw them after not knowing about them, that sort of stuff?
So I think one thing that a lot of your younger listeners have to realize is that there was a time before social media. The Pietasters came to Charleston, South Carolina, shortly after the release of Awesome Mixtape number 6.
Which was their second album for Hellcat Records.
Hellcat, right. So myself and Jason Mallett, at that time I had a little Yahoo group called Fort Sumter, and we went to the show, and it was really amazing. And the next day I was like, "Man, I wonder if these guys have a Yahoo group." And they did, but it had been like abandoned by whoever set it up. So I set up my own Yahoo group, which was like a fan site for the Pietasters, and I just started street teaming for them in 2002.
Like, whether they wanted it or not.
Right, yeah.
Well,
they didn't ask them to do it.
They were actually, I think if you're a ska band at any time, free marketing is always seen as a plus. If someone's willing to go out and help you promote your music for free, I mean...
Well, I think every band wants. I mean, that's what every band wants is
right.
that they empower their fans to feel as part of the band and really, it's that community. That's what every band wants is their rabid fans to get involved. And here you are, literally just a fan, and you took it upon yourself to really get involved and really push this band. And I think that that's amazing because...
Andrew, you're just a fan.
Yeah. Just a fan.
You're more than just a fan of me, pal.
Aha!
I
Knowing that we're recording in the closet here, I'm just saying.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think of it that there was a time before social media. I mean, social media now is such an integral part of our everyday life, but, before there was Facebook, before there was even MySpace, if you were in a band, you really had to rely on people on the ground, printing up flyers and passing them around town. I mean, everything was done by hand, and there was very little done on the internet at all. And Yahoo Groups was really one of the first kind of social media sites where people who were interested in the same hobby or subject could all meet from across the country and discuss whatever your favorite topic was. Mine was just happened to be the Pietasters. And so the second time I saw the Pietasters, I actually went back up to Maryland to visit my family, and they were doing a 3-hour harbor cruise at Annapolis Harbor. One of my Yahoo group members went up to Steve and said, "This guy Andrew came to visit you all the way from South Carolina," and he kind of gave me a shout out during the show, and that was really kind of like the first time I had met anyone from the band. Usually I would see them in Washington, D.C. at the 930 Club, and it was really kind of a happenstance. It's a long story short, but basically I wound up backstage at one of the 930 shows with someone from DC Ska. So I think that's when I, properly introduced myself and met the Pietasters. And, they've always been kind enough to put me on the guest lists, and, they were pretty integral to me moving from Charleston to Los Angeles, because I went to a concert here in Hollywood at the Knitting Factory. But I mean, as far as, crazy stories, I think a lot of the crazy stories you all hear kind of emanated from 1989 to 1999. I mean, they were in their 20s, they were, drinking beer before, during, after shows. But definitely, I think by 2002, they had started to mellow out a little bit. And we'll get into the reasons why later, but...
Well, I think they've always been one of those bands, that sort of has mythology around them, meaning that there are some bands that, like Hepcat, it's just going to be an amazing show, balls to the wall, lots of dancing, lots of fun. But for me, anyways, coming on the West Coast, they've always been sort of one of those bands that this just feeling of craziness and out of control and just lots of fun, but their reputation precedes them for a lot of people because of all those crazy stories and all those antics that they do when they were playing younger.
Well, the Pietasters released a DVD in 2006, 2007, and some of the interviews they talk about, you're in your 20s, you're getting paid by a ska label to tour the country. There's usually free booze involved, free drugs involved. I mean, you're a touring musician in your 20s. I mean, that's obviously going to be your party time. Once you move into your 30s, I think they definitely mellowed out as people, and I think they also matured as musicians.
Didn't their guitarist die?
Todd Eckhart died in 2001, 2002.
Yeah, they just celebrated the 15th year anniversary.
I think that really, that took a lot of the edge off of their party band image. I think they were really affected by it deeply, and you can listen to Turbo versus Willis and Awesome mixtape number 6, and you can definitely tell, they grew as musicians, but they also kind of, I think Todd's death was a sombering effect on the material that they wrote. And, they did catch some flack for, how come you guys aren't doing songs like Freak Show and Drinking and Driving? And
they kind of started leaning a little bit more to the soul end of everything as they matured.
Yeah.
And it's still a lot of ska, but more of a soul influence as you get into the 2000s.
Well, I think the soul influences definitely started, with Willis. Songs like New Breed and, things like that. So those seeds were planted fairly well in the late 90s.
I think that's probably a natural progression for a lot of bands too. I mean, they've gotten a little bit older, they've gotten a little bit more success, they've been playing the ska for 15 years now, whatever. And so obviously they just start bringing a little bit other influences, try to do a little bit more soulful stuff, tone it down a little bit. They can't be bouncing off the stage all the time, right? So, or do you think that was just sort of, it's like you look at someone like Deal's Gone Bad, where their sound made a huge change when they got their new singer, and it really went into the ska soul sound, as before it was straight, really just rougher ska punk style of singing. You have a band like the Pietasters who got signed to Hellcat, we're trying to broaden maybe a little bit their sound, bring in some other style and people and fans, or no?
They started off 1989, and their influences were definitely, the Specials, Sex Pistols. I mean, there was definitely a punkier side to their sound when they started out. And then, Oolooloo is pretty straightforward ska. I think they just wanted to experiment. I mean, they're really talented musicians. The leap from ska to soul is not too far. They're both, horn-driven, up-tempo genres of music.
Well, I look at Willis and Oolooloo very similarly, but I think that when they did mixtape, for me anyways, looking at it, that was sort of an album that just really wanted to try doing something different, bring in some really different sort of influences, try to do something sort of different, not create the same album. Did you see that as well? Kind of like that album specifically?
I think what I really like about Awesome Mixtape number 6 is kind of like Deal's Gone Bad, and even maybe some aspects Go Jimmy Go. But I think on that album, they really mastered how to blend ska and soul. The album just flows so well from track to track. And I think on Willis, you don't quite have that flow. I think a lot of the soul on Willis was more experimental. I think they were just kind of trying things out for the first time.
Yeah.
When you get to Turbo in 2005, it's almost all soul. And there's a couple of reggae tracks on it, and maybe one ska instrumental. So that was a complete change for them. That was a wide swing of the pendulum. And I think their hardcore fans, I think we'll stick with them whatever they put out.
Well, they have. I mean, it's been 20 years now. We're all still there. It's like, they haven't lost fans because they just keep playing music. They have such an amazing live show.
I do feel like with Turbo, I think they did catch some flack from their diehard punk ska fans. Yeah. I think the way Steve Jackson, if I remember correctly, the way he addressed that was, I'm 35 now, I'm married, I have, a daughter. Like, I'm not that punk rock kid that I was 10, 15 years ago. I mean, people change, they get older, they mature, taste in music change.
Absolutely. I think every band goes through that. Just Rancid even. I mean, Rancid has sort of been playing the same album over and over again, but there are specific albums and specific songs where you just go, they're really trying something different songwriting style. Every band does that, and I think that's a natural progression that you see. Right. Well, let's take it back to the reason that we're here today. The album that we're talking about specifically is Oolooloo, and this was the album before they got signed to Hellcat, before sort of things blew up for them, and I think it's probably the album that most fans, I think, really found them. It's their second album in, they've been touring now for a number of years, and they really latched onto that album, and that's, the success of that album and the power of that album is obviously what caught Tim Armstrong's ear and had him reach out to them to sign them to join Hellcat. So, yeah, let's talk about Oolooloo.
What strikes me the most about this album, and I think the reason why we chose it, so many bands, regardless of their genre, like that sophomore album blows chunks. And this album is so iconic for the Pietasters in the 90s. I mean, this really kind of cemented their party band image. I mean, if you just looking at the track listing, there's so many songs about drinking or prostitutes or, one night stands. I mean,
barmaids.
The good stuff. Yeah. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Every song just reinforces this rowdy party boy image.
That's a good point, though, about being the sophomore album, because if you look at, The Clash's second album was almost crap. I mean, it was great, but when you compare it to the third album or even the first album, it was just kind of like this thrown together thing. Even the Specials, first album for the Madness, first album Selector, all of these amazing bands have great first albums and okay mediocre second albums, and then you get to this Pietasters, and this is the album that everyone remembers.
These songs definitely get, if you've ever seen the Pietasters in concert, especially in Washington, D.C., these songs are the ones that really get the crowd jumping. I mean, when you hear that first guitar lick of Girl Take It Easy, the 930 Club just goes crazy. Are songs that they will play Freak Show. That's almost in every encore. Like, these songs are like the cherry on the icing.
It's another Freak Show! It's another Freak Show!
These songs, Maggie May, I mean, you hear Maggie May in concert, the place just erupts. It goes electric.
Well, in Denver, they would always play at a place called the Mercury Cafe, which was the top level of this vegetarian restaurant. And when they would start Maggie May, everyone would be jumping so hard that the guys would come up from downstairs because they're just like, this place is going to fall apart if you don't watch it.
There's a place where we all go to have a few when we feel low, drink ourselves into a state, drown our sorrow and fuel our hate. A bomb-made beauty in a tight black dress pulls our fear and cleans our mess. That's to the name of Maggie May. When we see her, what do we say? Maggie May, bring us another beer. We need another beer. Take away our troubles here. Maggie May, bring us another beer. We need another beer. Take away our troubles.
This idea of these people talking about what's really happening on the streets and in the cities, and
but they also have kind of a whimsy to some of their stuff too, like biblical sense, like.
Well, it's like madness, It's like very dark stories, but in a whimsical sort of, way to look at it.
Sometimes I think Pietasters songs are darker than Madness songs. I mean,
well, no, that's what I'm saying, exactly. But with this sort of tongue-in-cheek kind of, hey, winking, it's dark, but with a
like there's some songs that have more of a wink than others.
Yeah.
Like the biblical sense, I'd heard that term before, but I don't think I'd ever thought about it in that way.
Yeah.
And it's it's a funny song, but like,
well, it's a clever song because they take biblical passages and turn it into sexual innuendo.
Well, I told you once, let me tell you again, I never ever wanted to be your best friend. All I really wanted to do was get to know you. All they really wanted to do was get to know you in the biblical sense, girl. In the biblical sense, girl. In the biblical sense, girl. In the biblical sense.
I think it's also important to look at this album in a historical sense. Right? 1995, Washington, D.C. Bill Clinton's president. The economy's on the rebound. Everyone's starting to feel good. You know, eventually this does lead up to Mayor Marion Barry, and I'm doing hookers and coke in a hotel room, which they would later address in Turbo. But you know, this was that time in history in Washington, D.C. when things were good. People felt good. I think this album reflects that time and what was going on in Washington, D.C.
But it's also but they're also making their songs timeless as well.
Yeah.
Because it's universal themes and they're talking about real life stuff. And I think that's what makes the best songs, when you have a song that, while specific to that time, can still resonate years later, especially with different events that come along. But you have like the Specials and all these bands that are talking about political stuff in the 80s, but you could still feel like you're connected. You could still understand the story. You have bands like, now the Pietasters with this album specifically, talking about things that are happening, political stuff in the world, and just relationship-wise that still resonate today. And that's probably why an album like this holds up.
I'm going to slightly disagree with that. I think the album sticks up because, A, the musicianship is superb, and the whole album screams debauchery. And, you know, if you were a teenager in the mid-90s, I mean, this was kind of like the semi-naughty album that you could listen to, but your parents really wouldn't mind, or they wouldn't catch on that, you know, Freak Show was about prostitutes in D.C. or Pleasure Bribe was about prostitutes in D.C. And, you know,
I'm sensing a theme here is what I'm saying.
I'm sensing a theme too. And it seems to be get drunk, get laid, have fun.
Right.
Well, and I think that third wave, especially, well, in Two Tone 2, you had a lot of bands that were more of the, we're going to wear funny hats and sing funny songs.
Yeah.
But I think in third wave, you had a much greater chance of them having a lot more of an edge, like Moving On Up. And one of the things about Moving On Up that I'll probably always remember is them dedicating it to Andrew when we saw him at House of Blues.
Yeah.
Nice.
But that song, you know, it's like, that's a song to go punch somebody in the face to.
Yeah.
Which,
that's the Rude Boy embodiment. Yeah, it's kind of and it's also kind of that swing vibe to it, which was also popular in the
in that
95,
time period,
96.
Stumbling along, watching car lights pass. I wish I got the number of the girl in class. Cool malt liquor is a few love life. Clowns of sorrow, pain and strife. Only nice to serve is a big Red Bull. Swimming toward a being in your pool. On my head full of sin, stumbling along, watching car lights pass. I wish you got the number of the girl in class. Blood clots heat like mice in traps. Scared for the cover before the attack. Moving up on you tonight. When the fists start to fly, I'll be feeling alright. I'm bigger than you and I'm better than you. Bigger than you and I'm better than you. Bigger than you and I'm better than you. And I'll beat you down like jumping weeds. On my head full of sin, stumbling along, watching car lights pass. I wish I got the number of the girl in class. Cool malt liquor is a fuel of life. Clouds of sorrow, pain and strife. Only master serve is a big Red Bull. Swimming in your toilet, peeing in your food. I'm bigger than you and I'm better than you. Bigger than you and I'm better than you. Bigger than you and I'm better than you. And I'll beat you down like chocolate wings.
Pietasters have one of the tightest horn sections, I think,
Yeah.
out there.
I could absolutely agree with that. Like, when they are on stage,
Yeah.
it's a sort of a punch to the gut. It's just crisp, very, very tight. Last time I saw them was at the Ska Brewing 15th anniversary. It was Scatolites and Pietasters. Right. It was awesome. Small little stage. I'm hanging off to the side of the stage with everybody, and they just go on, and everyone's been drinking all day because it's a brewing place. It's in
it's high altitude too.
high altitude in Durango, Colorado. Nicest bunch of guys I've ever met. Ska, beer, love to party and have a good time. Treated us all well, and these guys are going on stage, and you're just like, wow, that's what a band should sound like. I say this a lot. I look at certain bands like these guys, like Let's Go Bowling, and I go, hey kids, you want to be a band? You want to have a career? Go watch these guys. Look what they're doing. 20 years plus on. They're still acting like they're 20 years old, having a great time. They know how to put on a show. Go watch them. Pick up some of their tricks if you can, because almost no one can. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was just amazing. Nice guys.
I think "Girl Take It Easy" is probably my favorite song on the album.
Tapping at my front door. Girl, take it easy. Well, I woke up this morning to you knocking at my front door. Girl, take it easy, cause my head was hammering from the beers that we were tapping the night before. Girl, take it easy, and I remember stammering as you and I was staggering at my front door. Girl, take it easy. When I happened to notice a lovely young lady's head, I thought to myself, my God, what have I done? I've been drinking again and having too much fun. Well, I rolled a very gently in my king-size bed when I happened to notice a lovely young lady's head. I thought to myself, my God, what have I done? I've been drinking again and having too much fun. Girl, 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 won't you come back tomorrow?
About almost all the tracks, about 3/4 of them, and I think it's a pretty good overview. We've wasted a ton of freaking time, so
marvelous.
Hopefully
when we edit this out, it'll be 5 minutes.
Yeah, it'll be 5.
Just edit Andrew out. Just edit Andrew out.
So
his parts are
Here's
horrible.
our good friend Andrew.
Right.
And that's all the time we got.
That's all the time we got.
And we're done. You guys should probably do something better with your life than to listen to the three of us rattle on about ska. But
Something better?
Yeah, what are you talking about, Dave? Get out.
Okay,
There's nothing better than ska.
Why don't you tell us why?
Yeah, Dave.
Because it's not going to do anything
Shit.
for you.
Just so you know, 4 years ago now, they finally reissued this album on vinyl, thanks to lovely boys at Asbestos Records. So if you can, go out there, look them up, check them out, get it on vinyl, have a great time. Let us know what album you'd like to hear us talk about in the comments sections, via our Facebook page or the website or YouTube channel. What do you want to hear about next? Thank you.
And we would like to wish our friend Andrew well
yeah.
on his new endeavors in Seattle.
Portland.
Who?
Whatever.
What? Oh, yeah. By the way, anything outside of about 20 miles for Dave is
Seattle.
Seattle.
Yeah.
Like East Coast, whatever. Yeah.
Everything north of San Francisco is Seattle for this.
Yeah.
Andrew, seriously, mate, thank you very much for coming in and hanging out and talking to us about
Being one of the Blue Beat Boys.
the
thank
Blue
you guys.
Beat
Blue Beat
regulars.
Lounge, P2 crew.
You are a huge Pietasters fan. We appreciate it. And we're going to miss you in LA, even though we don't get to hang out with you as much since there's no Blue Beat Lounge.
Or ska.
We love you, mate. And
Thank you.
Just keep in touch.
In the words of the Pietasters, never sold out, more beer here.
Okay, and with that, I'm Dave.
I'm Lawless, and this is Ska.
I want to say a big thanks to Good Question out of Syracuse, New York, and their song I Need a Hero, which is the theme under the beginning and the end of the show. And also a big thanks to my brother for helping us mix the audio. Thanks for listening.